Good morning. Mr. Vice Chancellor, Chair of the Board, graduates, and honored guests. It is a great privilege to offer the citation for our honorary doctoral recipient, the Honorable Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. Dr. Turpel-Lafond is Cree and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, an internationally renowned Indigenous lawyer, judge, legal scholar, children's rights advocate, and champion of Indigenous restorative justice. Dr. Turpel-Lafond is one of our own, having completed a Bachelor of Arts degree at Carleton University. Welcome back. Since 2018, she has served as the inaugural director of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center at the University of British Columbia, where she also holds an appointment as professor in the Peter A. Allard School of Law. In this capacity, she is offering visionary leadership in responding to the calls to action of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In addition to her Carleton degree, Dr. Turpel-Lafond earned a JD from Osgoode Hall at York University, a Master's in International Law from Cambridge, and a Doctor of Law from Harvard. Early in her career, she taught at the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University and in other law schools across Canada and the United States. A member of the Indigenous Bar, as well as the Law Societies of British Columbia, Nova Scotia, and Saskatchewan, she was the first Indigenous woman appointed to the judicial bench in Saskatchewan, where she would serve as a provincial court judge for 20 years. Dr. Turpel-Lafond has enjoyed an exemplary career as a tireless and effective advocate for the rights of Indigenous peoples, working as a mediator and negotiator on land claims, human rights, and public law litigation. She is also the author of over 50 published works and reports. For 10 years, Dr. Turpel-Lafond was British Columbia's first representative for children and youth, and in that path-breaking position, she undertook a detailed examination of the child-serving system and worked to implement improvements to enhance human rights through case advocacy for more than 17,000 children, youth, and families, the majority of which involved Indigenous peoples. More recently, she has represented Canada in the United States in the United Nations initiatives to advance child welfare reform and Indigenous rights. Dr. Turpel-Lafond's contributions have been recognized through numerous accolades, including the 2017 International Society of Adoptable Children's Lifetime Achievement Award, the President's Award from the BC Government Employees Union for her leadership in children's service and human rights, and the distinction of Indigenous Peoples Council from the Indigenous Bar Association. Mr. Vice Chancellor, in recognition of an extraordinary career devoted to the needs of children and youth in the justice system, and her inspiring commitment to advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples, particularly through child welfare and criminal justice reform, I request that you confer the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, on Dr. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond.
By virtue of the authority vested in me by the Board of Governors and upon the recommendation of the University Senate, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Vice Chancellor and President, all of the distinguished guests on stage. I'd like to recognize the Elder and also acknowledge that we're meeting today on the unceded territory of the Algonquian Nation. I'd like to thank Barbara Dumont-Hill for her beautiful prayer and opening remarks today. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you graduating today and your families and friends I certainly have a great deal of honor and gratitude to accept this doctorate today from Carleton University, which is also my alma mater. So the first time I was in your position was about 36 years ago. And I can say that Carleton certainly helped me launch a path of learning, engagement, and justice. As you heard, I had the opportunity to study law, practice law, teach law, be a judge, a child advocate, and more recently return again to teaching law and practicing law in the role that I have as well at the History and Dialogue Center to address the issues of residential school survivors and the need for justice for Indigenous people in Canada. I give a great deal of credit for whatever achievement I've had in my career to the professors and friends and colleagues that I had at Carleton University nearly 40 years ago when I started down this path. Carleton certainly stands for excellence, particularly in my experience in public policy, in gender diversity, in supporting First Nations and supporting people from different backgrounds. And certainly my 15-year-old son, my youngest child, who's back in British Columbia, is so impressed that I'm at Carleton today because he's a basketball player, and now he thinks I have some association to your winning basketball team. So I'm very delighted. I'm going to get some cred with my son. And I'm very delighted today that I am able to be joined here with my daughter, Ellen Turpel-Lafond, and one of my adopted daughters, Mary McNee. So thank you for coming with me today, too, to my family. Much of my career has been dedicated to justice for Indigenous peoples in a direct and practical sense, finding support for those in systems which have removed agency and decision-making in their lives, whether that's child welfare or justice systems, systems that often deny dignity and do not respect the fundamental human rights of all citizens, whether that work was in criminal justice, land claims, or child welfare. Certainly for the decade that I was a child advocate in British Columbia, I had a chance to work on, as Pauline indicated earlier, more than 17,000 cases, mostly for First Nations children and families. They were very difficult cases, many of which we were able to find some kind of resolution. So it was extremely valuable because I got to know so many families and communities and understand up front why so often the failures of our system of government and our justice system with respect to Indigenous people is a failure of recognizing the fundamental human rights of all peoples, including Indigenous peoples. And certainly when one works in a lot of cases, in a lot of instances, you have to have systemic thinking and understanding and systemic analysis. And again, I was most fortunate to have that first degree come from a place like Carleton University that emphasized to me the need to do deeper analysis of social problems and to look deeper and to analyze more deeper systems and the need to shift and change matters in society at a broader level in addition to just looking at individual cases. When the Truth and Reconciliation Commission reported in 2015, after hearing from more than 7,000 residential school survivors, they certainly were brave people to come forward and share their experience at the Indian residential schools in Canada. And the Commission, in its brilliant report, issued 92 calls to action, most of which remain unfulfilled. And we need to keep working hard on them because at their basis, they were about denying human rights and the need for Canada to shift how it respects human rights. One of the fundamental, most basic recommendations of the Commission, which I think remains one of the most important, was the significance of implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into Canadian law and practice. And in fact, the Commission said that it was the framework for reconciliation. And reconciliation is a word that sometimes is bandied about in a meaningless way. The recognition of UNDRIP into Canadian law and practice is a very significant objective that remains before us. In the past year or so, I've had the great honor in British Columbia to lead and work with a team of First Nations lawyers representing First Nations of British Columbia. And we've sat with the province of British Columbia and co-developed and co-drafted a bill that was introduced a few weeks ago in the BC legislature, making British Columbia the first province in Canada to implement and adopt the UN Declaration. This has been a very significant work, and it was work in which we were joined not only in this collaborative experience with the government and First Nations, but also with industry, labor, business, other parts of society, civil society groups, and universities, including like the University of British Columbia, to make sure that this bill is introduced and hopefully will pass. I share that with you because it's an important achievement, and the work is ongoing. It's achievement not just of one person, but all of us working together. Yet, BC has taken a step to do what unfortunately Canada fell short of completing in the last Parliament. And some of you will know that there was an important bill, 262, which was a national bill to implement UNDRIP for Canada. That was developed by a backbencher, Romeo Saganish, who's a Cree, very prominent Cree leader, who did not offer to run in this most recent election, but spent most of his time pushing Canada. And that bill did pass through the House of Commons, but it died on the order paper in the Senate earlier this year. That was a missed opportunity. And certainly, I think one of our challenges will be to see the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People properly adopted and implemented into the laws of Canada. Without that kind of bedrock recognition of human rights and principles like the 46 articles in that declaration, which was developed by Indigenous people with Indigenous people around the world, and which sets out the minimal standards for the survival and dignity of Indigenous people, we will probably not see fundamental shifts in Canada. Canada will remain in a position of denying and not embracing the rights of Indigenous people. I'm very grateful in my career of being able to serve a little bit as a disruptor of systems that haven't worked very well, but also a builder of systems that can work much better. And as you can hear from my comments today, I feel so strongly that there's so much work to be done. But I also recognize that when I graduated some 36 years ago, I stood on some very tall shoulders in terms of people at Carleton, in my family and community, to go forward in the world, make a change, and become a leader. And so today I'm very happy to graduate along with you, the graduates of 2019, and I call upon you to do the same. Stand on the shoulders of the people who have so willingly taught you here, your family and your friends, but go out into the world and make it a better place, a more respectful place, and a place that's more tolerant and upholds the human rights of all people. Thank you.